Welcome back to the County News Podcast. I'm Charlie Ban. Nearly 900 counties experience at least one natural disaster each year, and those counties are responsible for responding to, recovering from, and mitigating against disasters with varying levels of assistance from their state and the federal government. Improving that system has been a long-term goal for counties, and right now, NACo's Intergovernmental Disaster Reform Task Force is working to provide feedback as Congress pursues its own reform efforts. Some of that insight is coming from county officials like our guests. Kevin Leonard is the executive director of the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners. Last fall, he began working with the North Carolina League of Municipalities and the Councils of Governments in Western North Carolina to get all of their communities working together as they recovered from Hurricane Helene. He joins us to talk about the work his association has done to help more than 25 counties recover from the hurricane and what he's learned about disaster recovery and mitigation. Later, Yakima County, Washington Commissioner Amanda McKinney joins us to talk about some of the long-term consequences her county has faced in the wake of a wildfire last summer. Well, Kevin, thanks for joining me today. Tell me about what you've seen in Western North Carolina counties as you've visited them over the last few months.
It was around September the 27th of last year that the rain moved in. The 28th, we found ourselves in the State Emergency Operations Center, the EOC, as an association, myself and my colleagues, and we didn't know we would end up being there for a little over 3 weeks every single day, helping to make connections with our counties, really triaging a lot of things.
You were kind of a living Rolodex at that point.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it really came down to using all the contacts that we had in our cell phones, trying to make sure that things were connected, and it worked. And I'm glad, I'm proud to say that the association played such a role. And I cannot overstate the magnitude of this disaster. We have 100 counties in North Carolina, 25 plus of them, so a quarter of our counties were impacted this in an area that is not used to a hurricane and rushing water. It'd been over a century since we've had such an event like this, so not in anyone's memory of just how bad this particular case was. So we had 2 rain events, and that, if you go back and sort of study what happened, you will see 2 rain events. One was a soaker, a couple of days in advance of this, so that, and then the hurricane came and sat and then moved on out, but it overwhelmed the rivers and all of the systems, and the wind events included took down the communication system. So you can plan, as I said, but you can't. In fact, one of the western counties had just had a sort of a tabletop exercise where they had said, okay, what happens if one of these systems goes down? They did not exercise that if all the systems go down. So all the communication systems, transportation roadways were cut off, and then all infrastructure water was cut off. And so it was just literally overwhelmed all of those systems in the western part of our state. Relationships, I wanted to, we had talked about what we did in the first 60 days. So that was on site in the EOC, and the commissioners and the managers and the EM staff and all the county staff were just trying to, get through each day out there in the West. And we were working to create backup and those communication things here in that first month or so in Raleigh, in the capital. On October the 9th, I believe it was, that weekend, we had a board meeting in Greensboro. President T. Davis had just been inaugurated in August. He really didn't anticipate that this is how he's going to spend his presidency. He and I took a trip out there to go meet Todd McNeil, who's a commissioner in Ashe County, our second vice president. Relationships matter. I got a call from our emergency management director, Will Ray. He said, hey, I might have some folks who want to ride along with you. Turns out those were folks from the White House and high ups at FEMA. So we spent 8 hours in the car together that day. And out of that conversation and those relationships, which are still intact, came this idea of having a convening, working with our League of Municipalities and the 5 Council of Governments out west, pulling all of the local leaders together to basically say, what do you need? what's going on.
Quite frankly, at that point, how much time could those leaders invest in this, given the needs they had at home?
So if you ask some of my colleagues, it was probably one of the proudest moments of some of the work we've done. And at the same time, they would say, please don't make us ever do that again. Because that car ride was on the 9th. I need to go back and look. It was on a Wednesday. And then we pulled that thing together, and we had it in less than 3 weeks. So that took a lot of coordination and just a lot of sheer will. So out of that, then the phone calls started happening with my counterpart at the league and bringing the COG executive directors in. Our state senator, a lot of credit goes to Senator Tillis, because I communicated with him and I was like, hey, here's a thought, here's an idea. And he said, yes, we need to do this. And he put his full support behind it in the governor's office. It really was a multi-level, intergovernmental level, bipartisan approach to pulling all of this together, and it took a lot of time and effort. I don't want to fool anybody that it didn't, but we did it and we pulled it together. We had the current governor. There was an election that week, so we had representatives from the governor-elect's office. We had representatives from our junior senator. The senior senator was there. The Speaker of the House, who had just won his election to become a member of Congress. We had multiple House and Senate members there. We invited the chairs of the county boards and the county managers, the mayors and the city managers, and then representatives from all of the COGs. The FEMA director at the time came that morning. So it was a big event, and I think it was a meaningful event. And we did have some of our locally elected officials who were like, I just don't know that I can come away from the disaster at the moment. But it turned out that it was a really meaningful time to come together to describe what had happened. It was almost cathartic in some way. And also we asked them to identify what their most immediate needs were, their intermediate and their long-term needs were. And we brought in people from we brought in county managers from the eastern part of our state who've gone through this before, to facilitate conversations in breakout sessions so that they could relate and sort of synthesize what was going on. And then they reported out to the group. One of the most surreal moments was sitting there with our president, T. Davis, the president of the league, and my counterpart at the league, and then the governor of the state. Literally, he was taking notes as they were reporting out what they said their needs were. So it was a neat moment to have this spirit of let's roll up our sleeves and try to figure out what people need at this time.
Now, I imagine also with a lot of different people saying a lot of different things, having everybody in the same place to make sure that if a story is being told, the right people hear it, and it's not lost in the noise and all of the overlapping news reports from a different area, that the story's being heard.
Correct. It was a high value of that, because you could, on site, correct or guide misinformation, which was remarkable to me, that was going on at the same time as just trying to get through the disaster. So having everybody in that room and having the solidarity of all the leaders, despite no matter what party it was, talking about the fact that we were really desiring to work together and push this forward was highly meaningful. And I didn't realize how meaningful it was at the time, but it really was. And we committed, the league and the association and the COGs committed to doing these as long as they are needed. And so we have held 3. I think the big thing now for counties and what we're working on behalf of them and the pressures they're feeling, they're in budget season. Their budgets are being adopted right now. They have to be adopted in North Carolina by law by the end of June. And a lot of counties have used their fund balance to forward funding for debris removal or other things that could be and are reimbursable by FEMA. What we're hearing now is that due to elements going on in Washington, freezing of funding as well as changes at FEMA, that process has slowed down even slower than it normally is. And so the reimbursement process is slow. And that's putting a pressure on the county budget. And they're having to make decisions about stopping spend on other capital needs or other programs. And that's going to have a long-term consequence in those counties because they're making prudent decisions now for plans of planning, like we may not have these funds in the near term. So that's happening. And then just bigger macro picture, the issue related to the economy and, counties are largely in North Carolina is property tax and a sales tax. So not unusual from other counties, but mainly that sales tax component is being discussed as how much are we going to be losing in terms of people not going out there. The hurricane hit in the prime season, which is a tourist season in the western part of our state because of the fall colors. And so they missed that one. And if they don't have the bounce in the economy coming back, they are fearful that they're going to miss another year, and that could be really devastating. So we're working with our state and federal leaders to raise that story up to them.
What was some of this surprising feedback you got from either counties or municipalities or any participants during the listening sessions?
Two things: communication systems, redundancy, and infrastructure. That and I'll take them in that order. Because the communication systems went down, it really, I think, exposed for us and for everyone that it's fragile, especially in the mountains, because you don't have the fiber networks, and we're working on that for sure. But they rely so heavily on towers, and even in that situation in the mountains, sometimes because of the terrain, you don't get coverage. And so trying to figure out additional communication redundancies, it has been raised as something that we probably really need to work on. And that's going to cause great discussion, I think, with the telecommunications industry, because in North Carolina, the telecommunications industry, really wants to hold that close and not have a system that potentially competes. And our desire is not to compete in any way. Our desire is to create redundant systems that help protect the public safety. And so working with our telecommunication partners, we want to really, and we probably need to have bigger conversations about that. Infrastructure, when the systems went down, and I'm talking about water mainly, like water and sewer systems, but water there's a lack of interconnectivity between systems for backup. When we could easily talk about it and plan for it, if we could have a backup line to another system that's close, that you could turn that on if necessary, and perhaps some consolidation of systems, which gets into a lot of local politics, of course, between cities and counties, or city and city and county. But I think that it became very evident during this disaster that we need to have a better look at how we more thoughtfully plan bigger or systems that are tied to each other in some way. And again, that's not inexpensive. It's not an inexpensive problem, because it's going to cost a lot of money to rebuild back or build some of those systems back, or to connect a system. And again, the terrain in the mountains doesn't make it really easy. You got to go over a hill or over a mountain and through rock and all that sort of thing. So I think those are two things that stood out to me.
There's some discussion in Washington about taking disaster response to the state level. what has this experience demonstrated to you would be necessary to get North Carolina to that point where it could meet FEMA's capabilities that it currently displays, and what's the SWOT analysis for how North Carolina could approach taking over what has been FEMA's role in disaster response?
So you might get a mix of Kevin's opinion versus, I think an official opinion on this. And I would caveat it to say that I think it might be a little too early to determine that. But I would answer your question this way, is that from our perspective, FEMA did its job early on and did it well. There are problem areas, of course, but it's, being very up close to it and being literally in the room, watching how it unfolded. It's so difficult to describe in the moment, in the heat of the moment. Hindsight's 20/20. But the fact is, everybody in that room is there for one reason, and that's to help the people, help the people on the ground, help the counties, and they're doing the best, absolutely, that they can. I think there is a great need for a role of FEMA in a natural disaster of this magnitude, because you need that. You need some coordinating assistance with a lot of force and a lot of bench, and they've got it. Now, I will tell you that the frustration comes later because of the red tape. And I think that's what people are really pinpointing. And I agree with it. And I think that the people at FEMA agree with it. There is so much regulation that seems almost nonsensical. And it's a balance between reacting fast and being accountable to the taxpayer. It's almost like you can't have both in an emergency. So you've got to figure out that balance, but sending it to the state and having the state be the responsible factor there, or even pushing it down further to the county on something of this magnitude, at this moment, I don't think we have the answers to effectively make that change.
Well, I think the point you made earlier, that nobody had seen something like this in the mountains before. So there's really there'd be no way for a state to have a standing force ready to go. They could meet that challenge. If you look at responsibly allocating your time training, the likelihood is you wouldn't deal with something like this. So why spend too much time training for it?
Yeah, I agree. I think you've got to build flexibility for people to react, but you don't know exactly what you're going to react to. So just building the flexibility to do it. I'll say this too, that watching our mutual aid happen in North Carolina is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And I in my heart, I've always known this about our counties. I'm so proud to work for them, that no matter what the challenges before us, our county leaders step up and they're willing to do whatever is needed for their neighbor. I don't know how many times I heard, well, let's adopt this county. Let's have an adopt a county program. We all of the eastern counties just, basically put everything down that they had, and they came over west to help their people out west. And several times I heard them say, they've done it for us so many times, it's now our turn. And there's going to, unfortunately, be another time in the future where the East is going to get hit, and it's just part of it. I will say, at this association, we had the benefit of receiving funding from our state legislature during COVID to set up a technical assistance team that helped our counties through and navigate compliance work related to ARPA funding. And because of that, we had an internal infrastructure already of technical assistance that our General Assembly turned again to us and gave us funding during this Helene disaster to help us provide technical assistance to our counties, and that's underway. And I think setting that type of infrastructure up within association, it's certainly benefited us in our counties, and we are able to deploy those resources to wherever it's needed and when it's needed. So we're actively working on that right now.
That was Kevin Leonard, Executive Director of the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners. Now here's a conversation with Amanda McKinney from Yakima County, Washington. We spoke in September 2024 about the county's efforts to recover from a wildfire a few weeks before. Commissioner, tell me about Yakima County.
Yakima County is beautiful. We're agrarian-based, and we always like to say that we grow your apples, your beer, and your wine. So if there's a paradise that exists, it's in Washington, in the middle and the heart of our state, and we love to grow great produce.
Do you straddle the Cascade Mountains?
We can see them from our windows. So we have unique views of the Cascade Mountain Range comes into our county, and then we have the beautiful foothills that fill into beautiful rivers that flow between all of our river valleys, and that's where we grow all that great produce. And then we have the unique ability also to go out and see some of the most majestic-looking volcanoes. Mount Rainier, Mount Adams are visible from nearly every viewpoint in our community, so it really is picturesque.
Wow, how much rain do you get over there? Is it where do you fit hydrologically?
We do not get a lot of rain. What we do see is snowpack coming into the Cascade Mountain Range, and in fact, the Yakima Valley is unique in that our irrigation is fully filled from either groundwater or from snowpack from the Cascade Mountains.
Wow, considering the size of your county and how much you produce there, it's kind of amazing that does the job. But I understand you have a problem with one of your significant irrigation infrastructure pieces. What are you looking at right now?
Well, as you brought up, we don't have a lot of rainfall, and so we do depend on the snowpack that melts off, which also feeds our streams and rivers, which of course we are really interested in our salmon runs and native species of fish. And so we have had a balancing act over the last 100 years of how to use this finite resources of water to make sure that we can irrigate our crops, have municipal domestic use, and also make sure that we have in-stream flow for our fish, our native species. And it is an ever-evolving process. And what we did over 100 years ago was, as a federal nation, we actually came in and created some infrastructure projects that literally brought the lifeblood of water to these fertile valleys. And so one of our irrigation canals starts way up in the mountains at a reservoir, and it comes down and hangs alongside of a cliff, literally. And it is made of concrete. They actually used some donkeys and wagons and some heart, sweat, probably a little blood too. But they went up there and they literally poured this 12.5-mile long canal in 2-foot-long concrete sections. And it still is in function today.
Wow, just 2 foot by 2 foot.
2 foot by 2 foot for 12.5 miles.
Wow, and that's lasted for...
They began the project 118 years ago, so the structure itself is 115 years old. It's been in use. It provides irrigation water to over 28,000 high-value crops, and it also provides municipal supply water for pressurization to several cities in the area, as well as residential use. So a lot of folks who live in eastern and central Washington receive their water that they used to water their ground or their yard, their little hydrangeas, whatever it might be, with irrigated water.
You showed me some photos of this irrigation infrastructure, and I can't believe that a structure of that size is providing all that water for all those uses. But sure enough, it's been interrupted a little bit. Tell me about how that came to be.
Well, we've unfortunately, like many rural communities with forests nearby, been devastated by forest fires. Federal fires on federal lands and state lands have really been devastating to our economies. Certainly, we like to harvest when fruit is ripe, and that is in the summer months, which unfortunately coincides with fire danger. And we have had lots of smoke, which forces our economy to shut down. It's certainly unsafe for our workers, and it devastates the crops themselves. One of the other side side effects, unfortunately, this particular year is that where the fire came through, it was so burning hot and it's such a steep area, and it went right along the canal. So unfortunately, what's happened is that the entire hillside and slope has been completely decimated. And so we have massive boulders that have been exposed, and they are crashing down into this concrete structure and literally busting it up.
There's no more buffer.
There's no more buffer. And then, of course, everyone knows that when the snow and rain does come in the mountains, now we have nothing holding that soil together. And we have already been forecasting from the BEAR team that does mitigation response for after fire response to see what slide impacts might be. And it is high intensity likelihood for massive slides, which of course would mean the entire structure would just literally fall off like a string of pearls.
When were these fires?
The fire is actually not even contained 100% right now. So it's been ongoing nearly 2 months. We're close. It certainly doesn't threaten any life or property at this point. It's more along the steeper parts of going up into the wilderness area where it is right now, which is typical for what happens with our forest fires when we're fighting them. So we're grateful no loss of life and that not a lot of major structural damage to homes. But obviously, as we've discussed, this is an incredibly important and vital infrastructure. There's over $2 billion annually of estimated loss of value, both in crop production and because of the supply of water to those users inside of the city areas.
You've got a 12.5-mile long canal. How much of it is threatened right now?
Truly, right now, the entire infrastructure is absolutely threatened. And the reason why, as we discussed, it was poured in these 2-foot-long concrete sections. And as you can imagine, there isn't anything holding it up other than what's connected to it. It has a small base, and it's also important to note that this is a truly interesting and fascinating example of the history of our federal government coming in and creating infrastructure hundreds of years ago. And we have a Bureau of Reclamation owns the irrigation canal. There's an irrigation district whose users are responsible for maintaining the structure and making sure the water is delivered. And it sits on leased Forest Service land. And on each side of the canal itself is the checkerboard that we all know of federal land and, of course, state land. And then there's wilderness land. And so as you can imagine, it isn't something that you can easily come in and say, that tree is a problem. We should cut it down. This hole is a problem. We need to do something to solidify this slide. We are faced with environmental reviews, cultural site reviews, you name it, the permitting process to just try to conceive of how we can hold this thing together while we work towards a long-term solution is quite daunting.
Can some of those processes be done concurrently, or do you have to pass one before you start the other? And basically, how do you untie this knot of different land ownership?
It's well described because that's exactly what it is. And concurrently is exactly what we're doing. So we have the immediate approach, which is quite literally patching holes in the concrete when a boulder busts through in the night. And then we have what can we do between the end of water delivery, which is October 1st for this year, between when the next snowfall is going to come so we can take care of what mitigation we can do to solidify the slope. And then we are simultaneously planning for what is a strategy to repair or replace this vital infrastructure. Fortunately, the Yakima County Irrigation District, which owns or rather maintains the property, their board made the wise decision several years ago to conduct an environmental review and study to see what could we do for this infrastructure. It clearly, it's 115 years old. We could be doing things a lot better, and there are alternatives which were studied. And so we already have at least a kickstart in knowing that there are potential replacement strategies that have already been vetted, and it's just a matter, though, of funding. Certainly, that's always the case. But right now, we're looking at potentially a federal disaster, which would enable us to access funds for this critical infrastructure to replace it much sooner than if it was to be led on the backs of the users.
Given that the fire is still ongoing, is there a point when you have to identify, there could be a lot more damage before this is all done. How do you get the proper scope of the disaster declared when you're also trying to get the work done as it's going on?
You're right, because we're supposed to show as much damage, and right now we're repairing all the damage. We have to. And it is actually a very condensed timeline. From the time a fire is 100% contained, you have 30 days. 30 days to show the damage, which also means on day 31, if it catastrophically falls off the side of the hill, you're out. it doesn't matter. So it really has exposed some intricacies to the federal disaster process that I think definitely need to be revamped. Most of it, of course, has to be directly related to the fire. And how do you show that the concrete has been degraded so much because of its exposure to high heat is directly related to fire, and prove that within 30 days? We are endeavoring to do so. We've done core sampling. We also happen to have a piece of concrete that was made to commemorate when the canal was created, that was kept down inside the city at the office for the irrigation district. So at least we can represent that it hasn't been exposed to this high heat. And so we're waiting for results to come back as quickly as possible to see if there's a differentiation between those two pieces of concrete, one obviously being exposed to the high heat and one not.
Who's been running point for the county as you go through this process? Is it the emergency manager? Whose shoulders has this fallen on over the last 2 months?
That's a great question. And I would say that for the urgent emergency aspect, we do have an Office of Emergency Management and we do have a director. But their role is to deal with telling people it is time to evacuate. Where can I go? Helping with the Red Cross. Where can I put my cattle or my horses? Helping with evacuation and making sure that people understand road closures and things of that nature. What are the immediate resources? Long-term is not their role. We have a small staff, most counties do, right? We've got a part-time individual who can work on grant applications, but a strong person to be on staff at all times to work on the post-disaster does not exist. It isn't there. And so who's running point? That would be county commissioner.
My goodness.
And so using all the resources possible, I would say that the BEAR team that's been involved has been incredibly important. I cannot stress enough how important having existing relationships has been. Forging relationships, which unfortunately was due to another disastrous fire 2 years ago, but learning from that experience and creating relationships with the people who are responding locally on the ground, representing the federal and state government agencies who are involved, has been critical to be able to try to meet this 30-day deadline that has been thrust upon us. I want to thank all of them because they have absolutely been incredible to work with. And they really do have an eye on understanding that it is such a complex problem, and how to untie the knot, as you put it, is extremely difficult. And again, the irrigation district director, their job is to make sure that the canal functions and delivers water. Understanding how to apply for emergency grants through the state and federal government is foreign to them. That's not something that's in their wheelhouse. So they're relying on a county partner and our Office of Emergency Management and the relationships that we've forged in other areas because of other disasters with state and federal agencies to try to help this district figure out what is the best path.
Given that the fire is ongoing and you don't have the full scope of what you're looking to repair, do you have any type of estimate for what repairs or replacements going to cost?
The irrigation district, of course, knows exactly what's wrong with the canal, and they have created an estimate that they're working on to try to reach the threshold. So FEMA is going to require $14 million of direct loss as a result of the fire. And, of course, the 30-day time clock starts ticking as soon as we receive our fully contained designation. Right now, the numbers that we're showing, we exceed the $14 million, but of course it will be up to review and scrutiny, and that is ongoing. The other issue is how much would it cost to replace? Well, as I stated, that we did have, the irrigation district did complete a study that actually came up with 3 alternative replacement strategies. And at the time, several years ago when this was completed, they were anywhere between $180 and $250 million. One of the primary and leading options is to actually move the point of diversion from way up the canyon, up at the reservoir, and actually bring it down into the valley floor. This would actually leave water in stream, which would benefit our fish supply, and certainly is something that is we're keen to work with our Yakima Nation partners on that. The deciding factor on that, of course, going forward is that you still have to have power to pump all of that water back up to the top of the basin where those water rights need to be delivered. And unfortunately, the forecast of the cost of doing that was deemed too costly. I am very hopeful that one of the solutions will be working with the federal government to see possibly there's a way with the Bonneville Power Administration to get power there at a discounted rate because it is critical infrastructure. So I do think there are opportunities for further partnerships to explore, but that's one example of a very viable solution that already exists.
You've been up there. You've seen a lot of what you're dealing with. Describe what it's like to be up there.
When you go up there, you do have a sense of nostalgia because you have to remember that people literally worked with their hands and poured concrete in buckets to create something. And I always look at infrastructure like that and am utter awe of the things that we accomplished when we really and literally rolled our sleeves up and said, today we're going to build this thing. And then we did it. I love that can-do spirit. And so I carried that with me as I was walking up and down the corridor thinking, we can do this. If they built this under those circumstances 115 years ago, certainly with the tools and resources we have today, we can do it even better. So I'm very optimistic. I know that the people in the community, especially, again, I want to reiterate, the state and federal agencies that we work with, the people who are helping us are local people. They live near or close by to this community disaster, and they may work for a federal agency, but it is also their home. And that shows and is reflected in all of their words, deeds, and actions. So I am really optimistic about being able to pull this together.
All right. Well, I hope, and I imagine this is not something that the ratepayers can shoulder. So you absolutely need federal assistance on this.
I'm
feasible.
I'm a fiscal conservative, and this is one of those things where I think that we would all expect that our taxpayer dollars are absolutely meant to help towards these types of funding issues. This is critical infrastructure. The Yakima Valley feeds the nation, literally, and we take great pride in doing so. In this case, we need a little help to get our 115-year-old infrastructure replaced so we can keep everybody well-fed and happy. And as I said, we grow your apples, your beer, and your wine, so you really want us to continue to be productive.
Thanks for listening to the County News Podcast. You can learn more about our Intergovernmental Disaster Reform Task Force at NACo.org.